You want to ensure that the people who are actually creating the models are representatives from different groups within the workforce, that they're involved in the decision making about how AI is going to be developed, how it's going to be used.
You are listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.
Welcome to this episode of C-Suite Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. C-Suite Perspectives are conversations that take an objective, nonpartisan look at a range of subjects that matter most to business leaders. I'm Steve Odland from the Conference Board and the host of this series, and in today's conversation, we're going to discuss the transformative effect of AI on the HR profession and how things have changed over the past year, and they have changed mightily. Joining me today is Diana Scott, the center leader of the U.S. Human Capital Center here at the Conference Board, and a longtime CHRO and an expert on all things AI and human capital. Diana, welcome.
Thank you.
Just for our listeners, you're not a robot, right? You are a real person. This is not AI generated.
Oh, all right.
Prove it.
Thank you, Steve. I'm so glad to be here. This is an exciting topic.
That is completely artificial. So therefore, you know that she is human. So, well, listen, it's great to have you. And we've done a lot of work at the Conference Board on AI, especially as it relates to the human capital area. And our most recent report here, just a couple months ago, suggested that 23% of global CEOs say that they've already adopted some form of AI into HR. Can you just give an overview about what people are doing and what forms of AI they're using?
Absolutely, Steve. Well, actually, AI is already being used across every facet of employees' experiences at companies, everything from onboarding to performance management to succession planning. And let me just give you a few examples. So AI is central to helping organizations identify current and future gaps in the skill sets of their employees, as well as which people might have those skills. So a lot of organizations are looking internally to fill projects or roles. So for example, one of our members, Pepsi, is doing this, and they used AI to not only capture and analyze the skills that their employees had, just going through their resumes and going through their LinkedIn profiles. They had the employees actually validate that, and then they used that data to then match against roles and projects, short-term projects that they had, and match the employees to the skills that were needed for those projects. And they actually gave offers and put people on short-term assignments and actually recommended new jobs that they might want to apply for. So the employees were really happy, and the company has a way of really digging into the kind of talent they have in their organization and how to keep them moving around the organization and continue to develop them.
You know, as I think about all the different forms, and you have 100 examples, and we're going to share some more. But as I think about all the different forms of AI and how it works in, human resources, but human capital writ large, it seems to me that it's in order to make this software work, AI is software, and have the tools, accurately produce usable results. It all comes down to the quality of the data and the coding and all of that. How are companies dealing with that?
Well, you have to have clean data. AI is people powered, basically. So HR can actually play a vital role because it can evaluate how AI affects the organization's people. How do they ensure that companies, are using it effectively and safely? How are they looking at the data sets that they're using and making sure that the data is clean, that it's organized, that, clean data is going to actually drive much better outputs and results in this process.
Yeah. And this is a key point because, nobody spends any time talking about the quality of the data and how do you get it inputted and all that. But it really is. It's core to making any of these overlay processes work.
Yeah, two critical areas where AI can really help is in evaluating actually internal and external data and then identifying potential solutions to the needs that are stemming from those trends. But first, the organization has to actually incorporate the data, everything from, like if they're looking at workforce trends, they're going to have to look at all the macroeconomic conditions, the labor costs, offshore support, things like that. So they've got to make sure that that data is accurate. They have to put it into models, which have to be developed by human beings. So they've got to make sure that they're, developing those models in a way that they're careful not to introduce bias. And any kind of potential solutions coming out of those suggestions then that AI might make are really going to depend on data quality, the infrastructure that you have, and then how advanced the AI components are. So at the core of this is data integrity, but then it's also how you use that and how you develop your models. And people are at the center of that, of course.
Yeah, and you mentioned, an important four-letter word, which is bias, and particularly as you're in the human capital function, when you're performing all of these, these analyses, essentially, it seems like bias is key. It's core to the quality of the output. How do you recommend that companies test or screen for bias?
Well, I think there are always many concerns about bias. I think some people mistakenly believe that AI is more objective somehow than humans. But often the biases that shape how the technologies are used are really hidden. So, it can be based, it can deliver biased outputs. So it's really important to regularly assess the systems for bias, especially since the models can change over time. So, there are challenges in terms of making sure that you have, for example, one of the things that you can do is you want to ensure that the people who are actually creating the models are representatives from different groups within the workforce, that they're involved in the decision making about how AI is going to be developed, how it's going to be used. And that can range everything from ensuring the teams designing the AI models are coming from diverse groups and backgrounds to ensuring that leaders making the decisions about what use cases to prioritize, for example, are from a broad range of different backgrounds, different parts of the company. And I'm not just talking demographics, I'm talking perspectives. There, you have operational people, you have salespeople, you have frontline, back office, you have marketing and strategic folks. You've got to make sure that that's represented so that you're not building a certain bias into even a model that you create or even how you choose to use and apply AI. So, if you have that representation, I think that the development and use of AI can be quite effective. And if not, then things can go awry pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, so many people think of AI as, a sentient being, essentially, or, an autonomous thing, a robot that's running around making decisions. But, and maybe someday it'll be at that stage. But right now, it's still ones and zeros. I mean, this is software that's developed by people. And so people bring their own natural biases, or even if it's not bias, it's just, lack of, complete assessment on these things. And so therefore, if you're relying on these outputs, you can get to some bad outcomes if there is not this balance. So there needs to be testing essentially in a small basis before you prove that there's some level of reliability.
Absolutely. And frankly, I mean, you have to have good governance around it. And I think the HR areas are probably best prepared to perhaps drive some of that governance within an organization, because they can look at the people side of things and say, where can we introduce bias? How can we make sure that we're reducing the amount of risk associated with some of the application of some of these AI tools? How can we make sure that we have proper controls in place? How can we make sure that we're abiding by any regulatory and legal, things that we have to make sure we're paying attention to, because there are many more regulations that are coming out about AI tools and the application of AI tools. So the HR organization really could sit at the center of making sure that there's good governance in place. And if there's good governance in place, then your outcomes and the use of these tools is going to be much better, and it's going to be much more effective.
That's really interesting because, a lot of companies are thinking that it's going to be the legal department that kind of governs this thing. But, essentially what the lawyers are doing is just making sure that where the boundaries are and that people. But your point is that there needs to be inclusiveness in this, and inclusiveness in all aspects of that word, and therefore you're suggesting that the accountability, on a racy speak, the accountability really lies with HR, which is not, I think, the way every company is doing it, but it seems like a better control.
I agree, because think about the sensitivity of employee data, for example, and a lot of the decisions that HR is involved in, everything from who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets fired. Now, they're not making the decisions, but they're definitely at the table, and they're driving a lot of the process behind that. So it's especially important for HR leaders to ensure that AI is being used ethically. And I use that word I choose that word carefully. But I think, the good news is a lot of the concerns about, are we using AI ethically, overlap with how data is gathered and used ethically. And then, companies that have more mature policies for data can really ground their AI governance in some of those policies. But again, I think HR can play a key role in identifying even some of those risks and bringing them up to the light so that the rest of the C-suite and the organizations and even the boards can make sure that they're tackling these appropriately. And absolutely, the legal department is going to play a huge role in this, because they have to make sure that we understand regulatory legal issues involved. But you have to think about, operationally, how your processes work, the technology department, of course. And the human resource area can actually pull that all together.
Yeah. These regulatory frameworks are popping up all over the place. It's been the wild, wild west in some ways, with a little bit of lawlessness in the sense that there haven't been many. But you're seeing more and more emerge worldwide, especially in Europe as the leader in regulation. I think they have the highest productivity in regulation creation in the world. But that travels, and we're seeing it now at the state level here in the United States. What do you think is coming, and what's going to be the impact of these regulatory frameworks?
Well, I mean, every state is looking into this. So, we have 50 states here in the U.S., so that could mean 50 different versions of regulation about how AI is applied and how you need to, govern yourself. Europe certainly has taken the lead on this. I think at the federal level, it's interesting. I mean, we really haven't. There's a lot of discussion about it, but when it comes to the HR aspects of it, employment, we've done a lot with the EEOC. We have a very good relationship with them, and Keith Sonderling has done many webcasts with us, with me specifically. I think that his perspective is always, you need to abide by EEOC law as it exists currently, and the application of AI doesn't absolve you of the need to abide by those rules. So he says, just continue to follow the law, and you are responsible. I think this is the difference, perhaps, or the nuance. You are responsible as an organization to understand how you're applying these tools. And if you're applying these tools in a way that somehow introduces bias into your decision making around hiring or firing or promotions that are in violation of EEOC rules, then you're going to be in trouble. So yeah, it's pretty simple. The human being still needs to be involved.
Yeah, and as long as they're humans, going to make mistakes. So if you're recommending that HR sits at least at the hub of the wheel, it does require that legal sit as one of the spokes here, and provide some heavy consult and some level of oversight to make sure that everything stays on track. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, a lot of HR people that I talk to talk about AI for use in the HR department, but HR departments exist, and you and I have talked about this, exist to facilitate the human capital across the entire organization, and it just seems like so much of the discussion has been on the use of AI in the department, but I don't hear you saying that. I hear you saying you're talking about the use across the company, and that HR can be the facilitator and the guide for that use and the analysis across the entire company.
Absolutely, and I mean, you think about the things that HR is involved in around finding, sourcing, hiring, the learning, the development that happens throughout somebody's career growth, offboarding, all of those different steps, engagement, retention, et cetera, those all have to be done to serve the needs of the business. They're not done just for the sake of themselves. And AI really can assist in almost every step of the way in terms of that whole employee life cycle. So yes, HR can take the lead in making sure that AI is making those processes and that experience for the employee and the managers and the leaders effective, that it is, supporting more productive use. But at the same time, it really is all in service of the needs of the organization, the needs of the individual businesses, et cetera. And so it needs to be designed around that.
We're talking about the transformative effect of AI on human capital. We're going to take a short break and be right back.
What does the future of work mean for your employees? How will your company navigate ESG? Will there be a global recession? At the Conference Board, our experts translate the latest research and economic analysis into insights and real-time problem solving for your organization. Membership at the Conference Board provides your team with an assortment of knowledge, from economics, marketing and communications, ESG, public policy, and human capital. As a member, you'll have access to our center experts, member-exclusive events, data and benchmarking tools, and peer sharing that will help you understand the present and shape the future. Consider becoming a Conference Board member today by visiting www.conference-board.org.
Welcome back to C-Suite Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland from the Conference Board, and I'm joined today by Diana Scott, the center leader of the U.S. Human Capital Center at the Conference Board. Okay, so we've got a new report this year at the Conference Board talking about the C-suite outlook in general. But in that report, 93% of global C-suite executives say that the adoption of AI is going to require new skills in the workforce, and it's going to require some retraining. What is your prediction on this? And are there any areas of the company that will be most affected?
Well, certainly the functions that AI can perform most effectively tend to be more administrative functions. So of course you could say, okay, then we can get rid of all of our admins and anybody who's pushing paper and doing data entry. That can all be done more effectively by a machine. And yes, there are aspects of that could, but I always argue the real impact and the transformative quality of AI is when you have the least interesting parts of a person's job being taken over by a machine, and then you get to reskill and upskill these individuals so that their jobs become more interesting and they can do more high-performing tasks, and they can personally be more fulfilled, but they're actually generating and they're creating more productivity and output for their jobs, and they're doing their work much more efficiently. Now,
yeah, but these terms are kind of scary to me, and a lot of people hear that reskilling, upskilling, and they go, oh my gosh, what, am I going to get a brain transplant? I mean, how do I do this? I'm an entry-level salesperson, and now I have to become a physicist. I mean, to me, I think what I hear you saying without the words is, okay, if we can automate some of this, if we can program some of it. I'm trying to use old language because it's the same discussions back in the 80s and 90s in the first phases of digital transformation. If you can take some of those rote activities away, it leaves you more time to think and produce and innovate and produce different things. So it really is a productivity tool more than a displacement, isn't it?
I think it's absolutely a productivity tool, and you can look at all the transitions that have happened through time. And you and I have talked about this, Steve. You have the advent of the PC, and then email, and then, the internet entered into the workplace. And everybody was always saying, people are going to lose their jobs. And in fact, many people today are saying AI is going to eliminate tons of jobs. Well, it's going to eliminate types of jobs. But there is a
or some work
or some work, some types of work, but it's actually going to create a whole slew of new jobs because you're going to need people who actually know how to program and use the AI tools effectively to perform some of these tasks, and to use and to innovate and say, well, what else can they do? And then how does that allow me to do my jobs differently and perhaps make my work more productive? And to your point, do much more creative work. There's an old expression that, the common refrain is, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI may take your job, which gets to the whole reskilling and upskilling need.
Yeah, but I think even that, I mean, it basically allows for, a different deployment, a more productive deployment of the resources that you have. And so, I don't know. I'm not afraid of this because I've been scared by parts of digital transformation for over 40 years, and every time you come out with the need for more people. But you have to train people. And so skills are not just, okay, if you don't have them, you're out. It's basically the need for companies to think about, okay, now, we have to train people. I used to think that, training people on use of Microsoft Office was going to be a full-time job for, for half the workforce, until it got, really well seated. But this has happened over and over again.
It absolutely has. And this is where I think the CHRO can really help shape how learning happens in an organization. I mean, they're in a position to help do that. And so, is learning celebrated? Is it rewarded? Are people given the time and the space to learn? Do they have access to the content that they need? Does the organization value and see the value in learning and encourages it? And I think that sets the stage to remove sort of that anxiety that people may feel about, oh my gosh, is this going to replace my job? It doesn't have to, but I think it comes down to culture. Like, is the culture one that has a growth mindset and that sees AI as a tool to, to automate tasks and create efficiencies in ways that then gives people time to do much more interesting work and to learn new skills? So for example, if I think even about the HR organization, there are many people in HR organizations that have spent a lot of time writing offer letters and putting data entering information in for the onboarding process to put people into payroll, and it's that all of that can be automated, but you need people to understand the process, to write the programs, to create, the work streams for that. And isn't that then allowing the people who are involved in that talent acquisition and onboarding processes to spend more time really creating a high touch, welcoming environment to onboard, lead, and train these new people and introduce them into the culture of your organization? So there's just one little example.
Well, no, that's a great example, but it just reminds me of every piece of software that's come along, right? People have put in these massive ERP systems that touched everything, and it was years of change management and business process change, because you don't want to customize everything to your old business processes. You want to take off the shelf, because again, everything that AI touches is software again. And so it's going to be expensive to go through every upgrade. So as people think through this next phase of what is been called digital transformation, that's what AI is. You've got to be thinking about how do I affect change management and business processes? Hence your whole HR at the hub of the wheel. This is their expertise.
Right, and I absolutely agree. And since reskilling and upskilling, which can be a very scary word, that's one of the most critical areas, and that's the one that employees think about the most. And if you're going to use AI well, you have to make sure that your employees have the skills that they need to remain productive members of the organization. And a lot of companies, they talk a good game about reskilling and upskilling, but the actual effects are sometimes limited or poorly measured or both. So I think as AI technologies take on more and more tasks, there's going to be a pressure to upskill or reskill and focus more on making sure that they can do it, that companies can do it very effectively at scale, because that whole partnership between AI and human beings is going to change fundamentally, as you said, how a lot of people actually work and the work they actually do.
Yeah, I just don't want people to be afraid. I mean, the example I remember when companies started putting those little keypads on all the conference rooms, and you had to schedule a meeting with the keypad.
Oh
and so
boy,
forth.
I remember that. It was horrible.
Well, and nobody knew how to schedule a meeting, and if people were, so it required some upskilling in order to train everybody how to use that silly keypad so they could have a meeting. But it's that
Exactly.
kind of stuff that we've been doing forever. So but it takes a deliberate effort to affect these changes.
Well, I think there's so many great examples where AI can be such an effective tool and almost like a little companion. I mean, you see a lot of the chatbots that are, AI assistants, and they might drive you crazy sometimes, but some of them are actually pretty good, and you can use them to just make your daily work much more effective and efficient. But it's not going to eliminate the human elements of what you need to build relationships, to to make sure that we're not derailing things, that we're being careful to manage risks. All of those things are still going to require a human being. But you do need to focus on developing some new skills. And that can be very exciting, and you can make it very exciting for your organization if you create a learning, growth-oriented kind of culture, and if the C-suite actually drives that sees value in that and expresses that and demonstrates that to their employees, then employees don't have to be worried about or scared of reskilling. They can actually be excited because now they get to learn and grow and develop and move forward. And isn't that a much more interesting way for them to contribute to an organization?
Yeah, and it's like everything else. I mean, at the core, we're human beings, and so I think your advice is for CHROs: don't scare people. I mean, just make this accessible, make this chunk it down into bite-sized pieces so that people can learn and don't feel, because you see generations pass by with technology where it just seemed too big, right? Everybody has a story of somebody's grandmother who hasn't figured out how to use their cell phone. But all that is they missed a training session because and so we have to, in order to bring people along, we have to be patient, we have to make it fun, all of these things that touch humanity.
And ultimately, this is going to absolutely improve productivity. It's going to drive productivity. It's going to increase, just innovation and creativity in the organization. So we have to understand that the end result is really what we've got to keep our eye on the prize. Why are we doing this, and how do we do this, and how do we make sure that the human beings are brought along for this really exciting ride?
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying is any task, in any business process, any task, any piece of that requires, redundant behavior, redundant activity, repetitive activity, not necessarily physically, but in any way, is a candidate, for AI application. And in so doing, you're taking away the worst part of everybody's job, the most boring part, the most repetitive part, the place where everybody watches the clock, therefore making it more fun, more exciting, more interesting, for everybody. And I know you agree with this, but then the challenge is to sell it that way and implement it that way.
I absolutely agree, and that's exactly how it has to happen. I mean, it had the top of the house needs to be reassuring, but also talk about how exciting this is, and how we as an organization will be here to bring you along and help you advance and grow as we apply these new technologies. And it's going to make our company more successful and innovative, but it's also going to make you develop new skills and be, have a much more interesting job and be able to contribute in new and different ways.
And all of those things answer the question, what's in it for me? Because everybody kind of gets, okay, I get what's in it for the company, you save money and it's more productive, whatever, but what's in it for me? And all of those things that you just said are critical to answering the what's in it for me. And once people understand what's in it for them, it should be an easy sell.
Absolutely. At least that's what we hope.
Diana Scott, great to be with you today.
Thank you, Steve. Always a pleasure.
You have been listening to C-Suite Perspectives, a podcast by the Conference Board.